A bridge ahead had no supports, yet cars drove across it without slowing. I noticed it because my headlights caught the underside. The road curved around a long ridge before opening onto a narrow stretch of highway that cut across a dark valley. Fog hung low over the trees below, glowing faintly under the dull sheen of rain on the asphalt. At first, I assumed it was just another bridge. Mountain roads were full of them, thin spans crossing ravines too deep for proper guardrails. Normally, you saw the beams or cables before you reached them, silhouettes against the fog. But this one had nothing. The road ahead simply continued, a flat ribbon of asphalt extending over empty air. I slowed instinctively. The windshield wipers brushed back and forth, their steady rhythm scraping across the damp glass. Rain fell lightly, thin enough that the road still reflected my headlights like a sheet of dull black metal. Ahead of me, two cars drove toward the bridge. Neither of them slowed. They reached the edge of the valley and continued straight across as if the structure were perfectly ordinary. For a moment their headlights hung in midair. Then they moved forward, gliding across the darkness. My stomach tightened. I leaned closer to the windshield. There were no support pillars beneath the road. No cables, no arch. Just fog swirling slowly under a perfectly flat span of asphalt. The taillights of the cars ahead shrank as they crossed the impossible stretch. Neither vehicle hesitated. Neither braked. They simply drove across and disappeared into the fog on the far side. I glanced down at the GPS. The screen flickered briefly before settling again. The map showed a normal bridge. No warnings. No unusual symbols. Just a straight gray line across the valley. I rolled forward slowly. The guardrails along the road looked ordinary enough, damp steel catching the glow of my headlights. The asphalt didn't change color or texture. But as I reached the beginning of the span, the air inside the car felt heavier, like pressure building before a storm. The radio crackled faintly. I turned the volume down. The engine hummed as the car crept forward. Then the front tires reached the bridge. Nothing happened. No vibration. No hollow echo from beams beneath the road. Just the same quiet hiss of tires on wet pavement. I glanced over the edge. Fog churned below like slow-moving water. But something about the depth felt wrong. Normally you could see faint shapes through fog, tree canopies, rocks, the slope of the valley walls. Here there was nothing. Just gray emptiness stretching down into darkness. I checked the rearview mirror. The road behind me had vanished. Not hidden by fog. Gone. The bridge extended in both directions now, a narrow strip of asphalt suspended over the blank void. My pulse quickened. "That's not possible," I whispered. The dashboard clock read 1:18 a.m. I looked back up. The bridge stretched ahead, disappearing into thicker fog at the far end. I pressed the accelerator slightly. The car moved forward. The tires sounded different now. Not quite rolling on pavement. More like sliding across a smooth surface that resisted them slightly, like rubber against glass. The guardrails bent inward subtly as the bridge continued, narrowing the road. My GPS flickered again. The map zoomed out without me touching the screen. Then it zoomed out further. The entire highway system vanished. Only a thin white line remained across the screen. No labels, no surrounding terrain. Just a path. I drove for another minute before realizing something else. The taillights of the cars ahead were still visible. But they hadn't gotten any farther away. They hung in the distance like two red dots suspended in fog. I checked the clock again. 1:18. The same minute. I blinked. The wipers continued their steady motion. Rain tapped lightly against the roof. But the minute never changed. I looked back at the road. The bridge should have been short, 200 feet at most. But I had been driving for several minutes, and the far end still looked exactly the same distance away. The fog ahead thickened. The taillights flickered slightly. Then one of the cars ahead drifted sideways. Not sharply, just a slow, unnatural slide toward the edge of the bridge. I leaned forward. The car reached the guardrail and passed through it. There was no sound, no crash, The red lights simply slipped into the fog below and vanished. The other car continued forward. Unaffected. My throat tightened. I glanced down at the clock again. 1:18. The second hand ticked forward twice. Then reset. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked strange. The dashboard lights illuminated my face faintly, but the reflection lagged behind my movements by a fraction of a second. I turned my head slowly. The mirror version of me turned a moment later. My hands tightened on the wheel. The radio crackled softly. Static filled the car. Then a voice whispered through the speakers. Not words, just a long, low tone, almost like breathing. The car ahead reached the center of the bridge. The taillights flickered once, then disappeared. Not downward, not forward, just gone. I was alone. The fog ahead began to glow faintly. My headlights reflected off something beneath the road. At first I thought it was water. Then the surface moved. Slow ripples spread through the fog below the bridge. Enormous shapes shifting far beneath the asphalt. The bridge trembled slightly. Not from wind, from something brushing against it. A vast, curved shadow passed beneath the span. The fog parted just enough for me to glimpse the surface below. It wasn't a valley. It wasn't empty space. It was skin, gray and smooth and impossibly large, stretching across the darkness like the back of some submerged creature. The bridge wasn't suspended over a gap. It rested on something alive. The road dipped slightly. The asphalt flexed beneath my tires. Far below, a massive shape rolled slowly under the span, like a sleeping animal turning in its rest. The radio crackled again. The whisper returned. This time it formed words. Almost across. I looked ahead. The far end of the bridge hadn't moved any closer. And beneath the road, the surface shifted again, as if the thing holding the bridge had just become aware of my weight. The next reflective marker showed my face instead of my headlights. I noticed it because the road was so empty. The highway cut through a stretch of forest that rarely saw traffic after midnight. The rain had started sometime after I left the last town. Light, steady, enough to leave the pavement slick and shining under my headlights. Water streaked across the windshield in slow, uneven trails. The wipers pushed it aside with a soft mechanical rhythm. Every few seconds, the roadside markers flashed. Those small rectangular reflectors mounted along the guardrail, designed to catch headlights and bounce them back in sharp bursts of white or red. On wet nights, they almost looked alive, blinking one by one as you passed them. I'd been watching them for miles. Flash, flash, flash. Each one appeared in the fog for a moment, flared brightly, then vanished behind the car. It was hypnotic. The forest around the road had gone silent sometime after the rain began. No insects, no whine through the trees, just the low hum of the engine and the whisper of tires on wet asphalt. Flash, flash, flash. Then the next reflective marker showed my face instead of my headlights. I didn't understand it at first. My brain tried to categorize it as glare, maybe a strange reflection from the windshield or the rearview mirror. But the image had been too clear. Just for a second, the rectangle beside the guardrail hadn't flashed white. It had shown my face, looking directly at me. I slowed slightly and checked the mirror. The road behind me disappeared into fog. Nothing unusual. I told myself it had been a trick of light. Rain could do strange things with reflections. Still, I kept watching the markers. Flash, flash, flash. Each one reflected the headlights normally. Bright white rectangles snapping into existence as the car passed them. I felt myself relax a little. Maybe I'd imagined it. Then another marker appeared through the fog. For a brief second, instead of light, the surface showed a face again. Mine. Closer this time. The expression was neutral, eyes open wide in the pale wash of my headlights. Then the car passed it, and the marker flashed white like all the others. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel. "That's not possible," I murmured. The sound of my voice seemed too loud inside the car. I slowed further. The dashboard clock read 1:07 a.m. The rain grew slightly heavier, the droplets thickening into streaks that distorted the beams of the headlights. Another marker appeared. Flash, my face again. But this time something was different. In the reflection, my mouth was slightly open, as if I had been speaking. I wasn't. I checked the rearview mirror again. My reflection there looked normal. Same neutral expression. Same steady eyes. The next marker approached slowly along the guardrail. I leaned forward, watching carefully. Flash, my face. Except this time it was smiling. A wide, unnatural grin that stretched farther than my mouth could comfortably move. I jerked my foot off the accelerator. The car slowed to a crawl. "That's not funny," I whispered, though there was no one to hear me. The forest remained silent. Rain tapped softly on the roof. The headlights flickered once. Not enough to go dark. Just a brief dimming. Then another marker appeared. Flash, the reflection showed my face again. But now the image lagged. I watched my hands tighten on the wheel. A second later, the reflection did the same. Cold crept along the back of my neck. I forced myself to keep driving. Maybe it was some kind of reflective material reacting strangely to the angle of the lights. Maybe my brain was tired. Maybe, Flash, my face again. Except now there was a thin line of blood running from my forehead down across my eye. I touched my forehead instinctively. Dry. The next marker appeared. Flash. The reflection showed the same injury, except worse. Blood covered half my face. My right eye looked swollen shut. I gripped the wheel harder. What the hell is happening? The radio crackled faintly. I hadn't turned it on. Static drifted softly through the speakers. The dashboard lights flickered once, then steadied. Another marker approached. Flash. This time the reflection showed my face twisted sideways, as if my neck had been snapped sharply to the right. I sucked in a breath. The car swerved slightly before I corrected it. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked normal. Alive. Unhurt. But the roadside markers kept showing something else. Something that hadn't happened yet. Flash. My face pale and still. Eyes open. Rainwater running across my skin. Flash. My head slumped against the steering wheel. Blood across the windshield. Flash. The car overturned. Headlights shining into the trees. Each marker showed a different moment. A sequence. I glanced down at the dashboard. The clock still read 1:07. It hadn't moved. The rain suddenly intensified. Water hammered against the windshield. The wipers struggled to keep up. Another marker appeared through the blur of rain. Flash. The reflection showed my face staring straight ahead. But the eyes were wrong. They weren't looking at the road. They were looking past it. At something standing in the middle of the highway. I slammed my foot on the brake. The tires skidded across the slick pavement. The car slid sideways slightly before stopping. My heart pounded in my chest. The headlights illuminated the road ahead. For a moment, I saw nothing but rain and fog. Then something moved. A shape stepped slowly into the beam of the headlights. Tall, thin, standing perfectly still in the center of the highway. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. The radio hissed louder. I glanced toward the nearest reflective marker beside the guardrail. Flash. The reflection showed my face again. Except now the expression wasn't fear. It was recognition. And behind the reflected version of me, standing just over my shoulder inside the car, was the same tall shape from the road. I turned slowly toward the passenger seat. The fog outside pressed against the windows. The car interior remained empty. But when I looked back at the marker, Flash, the reflection had changed again. Now it showed the car from the outside. Headlights shining, rain pouring down, and something enormous standing in front of the vehicle, just beyond the beam of light. Watching, waiting for me to start driving again. Because the next marker would show what happened when I did.